Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasami. So most people are staying here overnight because of the ceremony tomorrow, the Vesak ceremony. It's a little bit early in the, as far as the lunar calendar goes, but it's probably cold enough already in early May, so we have it early. But the meaning of this ceremony, the Vesaka Puja, they call it in Pali, is to commemorate the birth, awakening, and passing away of the Buddha. Very nice and neat, all on the full moon day of May. And the special aspect of it is, I guess some people, they celebrate it because of the birth of the Buddha. It's like Christians celebrate Christmas, that the Buddha was born this day. The Buddha, it wasn't the Buddha yet, but when he was born, he was potentially the Buddha, the fully self-awakened one. So it was a great event to celebrate, to commemorate. Then, of course, his passing away was, a time of great sorrow for some people, ones who weren't enlightened. And in Christianity, it's the Easter, isn't it, or something? Easter. When Jesus died on the cross, or maybe the main thing was the resurrection. Rather than the dying. He didn't really die. But of course, the aspect of the Buddha's life, which really, made it significant, was his awakening. Every human being is born, every human being dies, but not too many of them get enlightened. And actually the word Buddha means the awakened one, so if he hadn't become awakened, he'd still be Siddhartha Gautama, Mr. Siddhartha Gautama, just your average person. But because he did experience awakening, then that opened a new possibility, a new career move for him, I guess you'd say, something. And of course, there's various ways to look at it. The awakening experience, there's different ways to look at it. Some people just to say that the Buddha was awakened was good enough. And I don't know if you did the evening chanting tonight, but those are some of the, when you recite the qualities of the Buddha, the Itipiso Bhagawa, he was fully self-awakened, the Samma Sambuddha, and he was teachers of gods and humans, there's the, you'd say, the more deep teaching about the Buddha's awakening. If you know something about the life of the Buddha, the one part of it is that he was, as a spiritual seeker, he just followed the usual path of practice familiar at that time. So the Buddha, first of all, he undertook the practices of meditation, which were common in the Hindu tradition at that time. And it was said that in the scriptures it says that he very, very quickly mastered these techniques of samadhi, of concentration, up to the formless absorptions, and he was so accomplished that one of his teachers even asked him to be his co-teacher. and lead the community. So you can imagine that, some people would have stopped right there. They're really attained, they got really good samadhi, and can be blissed out all day long. And then the teacher even tells them, now you can also be one of the in crowd. You can be one of the teachers here. So get all the praise and all the. How many teachers have fallen for that one? No. Yes, I want to be a teacher. Yes, I want to be teachers of gods and humans, and be the big guru, But he didn't fall for that one. He was very, very. Probably one of the qualities that made him a fully self-awakened Buddha was his. We say his paramitas, his paramis. The Buddha apparently has 10 paramis, paramitas. And what would you say? The one of them was satya, honesty, or truthfulness. That was one of his. These are like very auspicious accumulations. You can say character virtues, or very positive qualities of your character. So he's really committed to truthfulness. Absolutely. So this kind of, okay, you can be the teacher and you're really accomplished and all that, but his commitment to truthfulness this was not the way out of suffering. And this is still a hard lesson for people to learn, that just having accomplished development in samadhi, deep concentration, is not the way out of suffering. The Buddha finally described it as a temporary abiding in peace. So you can have your blissfulness, your experiences of bliss, but it's not the end of suffering. One has to, for the average person, they have to come out of samadhi eventually. Sometimes some of the yogis can spend a long time, and there's nirodha samuppat, and they get 7 days. They can sit in samadhi and experience the bliss of samadhi for 7 days, and not have to eat or go to the toilet or sleep or anything. But still, after 7 days, even they have this very high accomplishment, they still have to come out of it and be back to the human condition again. And they feel the cold, they have to eat, they have to go to the toilet, they feel fatigue and tiredness, and back to suffering again. And then the Buddha tried, the next stage was the practices of asceticism, self-mortification. And apparently the Buddha spent many years developing these ascetic practices to try to, I guess the main principle is that, the body is kind of the weak link. If one can really sacrifice the body, then the mind can rise above the body, rise into higher spiritual realms or something or other. So the Buddha tried many, many years of extreme asceticism, freezing himself and baking himself in the sun and fasting and living in kind of frightening places. But after all that, after extreme fasting, one day he got up from his seat and collapsed. He just realized, the body has no more energy now. I haven't got any energy left to continue my striving towards awakening. So this is not going to help either. This is a dead end also. But then he could reflect upon his initial aspiration. The reason why he did follow the spiritual path was to find the cessation of suffering. And then he reflected upon, what are the kind of helpful supports, and of course, some degree of concentration, some degree of calmness of mind or collectedness is helpful, but it needs to be carefully balanced with contemplation. So he recommended, developing some degree of calm and then bringing up this reflection: what is the cause of suffering? And it said on his night of awakening, he reflected upon, he followed what became known later as a dependent origination, like I say very simply, in conditional causality, principle of causality, and he followed it back. What's the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is being born. The cause of being born is becoming, and then it's grasping, and it's craving, and it's feeling, and followed it back to ignorance. Then he realized that when ignorance fades away, the whole 12-link cycle, of the causes of suffering fade away. And when he had that insight, then he was awakened to the truth. And you could say they awakened to the truth of causality, which was a very controversial, and you can say a kind of a very, very fundamental breakthrough. And because in India at the time, and even today, people believe that there was some intrinsic essence to reality, to the human being. There's a God who made everything, or there's some inner force within us, or something that is the essence of our being. But with causality, it's just conditions, it's processes going on. There is no essence to it. Whereas in the conventional religions, they, maybe not being so enlightened as the Buddha, they talk about, there is some essence. Whether you call it a god, the Hindus call it Brahma, or it is a soul. We all have our intrinsic soul within us, and that's the real essence. And so you're trying to find your true self, trying to really find your real essence. But the Buddha tried that. That's what the basic teaching was. When you free your body, you mortify your body. It gets very weak, and then your soul, yourself, will shine through. But of course, it's limited by that belief system. And people can get very, very advanced states of realization. It's very subtle. You can kind of see through the limitations of the body, limitations of the mind, and then there's a very subtle essence of the self, or the soul, or the Atman, or something or other there. So it can be a very, very advanced state, and some people can, be in a very kind of evolved state of spiritual development, but still not be free of suffering ultimately. But the Buddha had the insight, profound insight into causality. Rather than being an essence to things, it was processes. There's all these kind of dynamic, changeable processes going on. Just like, nowadays people talk about, we look at something like this floor here, and we say it has a solid substance to it. But now they've, with scientists, been able to look very carefully with their, electron microscopes and things, look at the essence of that, and then they find actually all it is atoms. And atoms are mostly empty space. There's a neutron, and there's a proton, and there's an electron whirling around it. And in essence, it's basically empty. But it looks pretty solid. And it's a good thing it is, otherwise you might fall through. You might step between the electrons and disappear. And if we don't contemplate, especially a contemplation from some degree of calmness of mind, this is a contemplation and reflection from a quiet mind, rather than just an interpretation or a logical inquiry, maybe this or maybe that. We can contemplate, maybe begin to see through, all the kind of fabrications, all the different interpretations and ideas and images and plans and stories we make about reality. You can actually begin to see it as it really is, as it mentioned in scriptures. And the Buddha, he didn't directly say what is, just the unconditioned, is it? But to be able to see things as they really are. So this implies, of course, if we are trying to develop the facility to be able to see things as they really are, there's the implication. We don't see things as they really are. Our eyes are clouded with ignorance, we say. Obstructed by ignorance and bound by craving. And that's the normal human condition. But the Buddha was able to have this realization about the causal nature of reality, and it was a very, very profound experience. It was like it transcended all the definitions. It was beyond space, beyond time, beyond any definition that he ever heard before in his life. Any perceptions, beyond all perceptions. So it was a real, you can say, he really could blew his mind. It's a bit of an old saying now, isn't it? He was awakened to the true nature of reality, and there's no words for it. It was sort of mind-boggling because it was beyond definitions. All of our words, all of our definitions are based upon ignorance, not seeing clearly. So at first he was just reluctant. Oh my God, people can't understand this. This is too much. This is beyond comprehension. So at first he wasn't going to teach anything. Just go off and live in his under the trees and live in the forest and live a very quiet life. But eventually he was persuaded to. Apparently one of the celestial beings reminded him that there are beings with little dust in their eyes who can understand your teaching. So the Buddha did finally agree that he could, try and do some teaching. But very interesting, in the Pali Canon, they mention the Buddha's first disciple. Well, the first person he met after his awakening. He sat under the Bodhi tree and different other trees around Bodh Gaya for a while, for I think it was 49 days, 7 days in 7 different places. Then he made his way towards Sarnath, the deer park in Sarnath. But on the way he met some naked ascetic, some wandering ascetic. And there were quite a few different varieties of these ascetics wandering around India at the time. And this one of them he met, and this ascetic kind of recognized that he was radiant. His eyes were bright, like somebody who was either newly converted or newly enlightened. So this ascetic said, "Oh, you seem very special. I mean, who's your teacher and what are you teaching?" And he says, "Well, I am the fully awakened one. I have no teacher. I have found the truth. I am fully awakened and fully enlightened." And this ascetic said, "Oh yeah, really? See ya, bye-bye." Went a different route. So his first teaching was not very successful. So when he finally arrived at the deer park and met his 5 companions, former companions, he didn't say, "I am the all-enlightened one." He said, "The deathless has been found. There is a path." And he put it in a very impersonal framework, if you like. And he even talked about it in terms of, this path of awakening. He said it's not. He didn't invent it. The Buddha just rediscovered it. It's always been there. There's been this ultimate truth, and some people have found this way. He gave the image of like discovering an ancient city in the forest, which has been overgrown with jungle. Been there all the time. People just forgot about it, or they haven't found it again. But the Buddha did, with his particular, these 10 paramitas, these 10 qualities, which were developed, they say, over many lifetimes, special character traits, you can say, with those and his particular, energy and interest and his unique approach. You say, on one hand, it was quite original. He didn't just go along with the established tradition, but he tried a different way. And with that, he was able to rediscover this fundamental truth. So in the Theravada tradition, they talk about over the endless aeons of time, there have been many Buddhas. I mean, the Pali Canon specifically mentions 7 different. This is the 7th Buddha, Gautama Buddha, 7th one. And they also say that for every Buddha, there's 500 silent Buddhas. 500 people who have a similar awakening, but they aren't able to teach. So, fortunately, it was just it would just so happen that this Buddha, Gautama Buddha, he was not only was enlightened, but he also had the ability to teach. It's like there are many, they say, many enlightened masters in Thailand, for example, but not all of them are gifted teachers. I remember going to see one of them in northern Thailand, and he was reputed to be a very highly enlightened master, and he never said a word. He just smoked his big cigar and smiled. And actually his smile was so radiant it was good enough probably for many people. I won't mention his name. We don't want to go there. But many different personalities, just like in the Buddha's time, the Buddha had, apparently, they say, 1,250 disciples. That was the talk I gave in Magha Puja. Another one of the Buddhist festival occasions is called Magha Puja, the full moon of March. And then the next one after Vesakha Puja is the full moon of July, Asalha Puja. That's when the Buddha gave his first teaching. So we have these kind of, these events during the course of the year to mark these occasions, you see. But of the 1,250 disciples, I mean, some of them, we actually most of them, like the first 5 were enlightened, the first 5 disciples, only one of them was really heard about, Asaji. The other 4, as soon as they're enlightened, you don't hear about them anymore. Just disappear. Huh? They probably didn't just die like that. They didn't just get enlightened and die, but you don't hear about them. They weren't famous teachers, for example. But one of them, Asaji, was one of the first of the first 5 disciples. He was just walking around, an alms round, and Venerable Sariputta, who was at that time belonged to a different lineage or something or other, different school of spiritual practice, saw him walking, and this monk must be enlightened. It's by the way he walked. So he went up to him and asked him, "Can you give me some teachings?" He said, "Well, I'm just newly ordained. I just newly went forth in this teaching, but I can give you a few words anyway." So he just gave him a few lines of teaching, and this Sariputta was understood immediately. He just said the Buddha, the teacher, the samana, the teacher, teaches, everything which can arise also has the possibility to cease. Arising and ceasing. That was a very short way, a succinct way of talking about causality. What arises passes away. And Venerable Sariputta was such a clever mind, so brilliant-minded. He just hearing a few words and he was enlightened, right like that. So, anybody? Conditioned causality, what arises passes away and is not self. We need a few more lifetimes of paramitas. But maybe some people, I can kind of speculate a little bit, I guess, but if you're have been conditioned to look for an essence, if we say we grew up with this belief in God, see, isn't God is eternal, right? And then the Buddha comes along and says, whatever arises passes away. Oh, you mean God passes away? Whatever is created, whatever is born, dies, whatever comes into existence passes away, and wow, you're not left with a lot to hang on to, are you? When we were moving into the monastery in Switzerland, it was up in the mountains, and we were actually in avalanche danger zone 1, you see, right next to the mountain. And first of all, I just said, well, Buddhists contemplate impermanence anyway, so. But we had to pay for insurance, which was very expensive, 10,000 Swiss francs a year for insurance. But anyway, the people who had it before us, they were fundamentalist Christians. And the local authorities, they found out they weren't paying insurance. So they went to these people and said, you got to pay insurance. Said, we have God to look after us. And they came to us and I said, well, we haven't even got God to look after us. So better pay insurance, I guess. That was their excuse. You have God on their side, you see. But when they had the 100-year snowfall, the monastery survived. So maybe we have got God on our side. Or Devas or something. That following year, they had the opening of Amaravati, so quite a few senior monks came to Europe. So they came to Switzerland, so I asked if they would do some chanting and thank the Devas. And even one of our neighbors who had the restaurant up on top of the mountain there, and I went up there after the springtime. I went up there for a walk, and I met him up there, and he said, oh, we had no avalanches up here. He says, you guys must be doing something sacred down there. He was dependent upon us to be sacred because he had his restaurant up there too, So he was on our side. But if we, the Buddha has this insight, this profound insight, but first of all, he tried to explain it, and then it became a bit formalized. So now they call this teaching on conditional causality dependent origination. So it's just formally 12 links in the chain, from ignorance to what they call sankharas, to name and form and consciousness, and then of course the scholars got a hold of it and made it even more complicated. So sometimes it's just better to keep trying to keep it simple, and many times in the scriptures the Buddha does still refer to it because there's various aspects of the teachings. The kind of classic one is, what is key to the whole of this causal process. A very, very simple phrase was obstructed by ignorance and bound by craving. You see, ignorance, not knowing. We don't know, so we, kind of bumble along. And then there is this very powerful force of craving or desire. And just being able to recognize those play a very, very key part in, we can say, in the whole spiritual practice of Buddhism. Like in the Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering is craving. Very, very strong desire. It's even to the level of, I would say, even this very primal desire, because it's for craving for things like survival, craving for existence, craving for sense pleasures. Very, very fundamental aspect of, our way of functioning in the world. If you didn't have any craving for existence, you wouldn't even go out to find something to eat, That's your survival instinct, you can say. It's like an instinct even. But sometimes it becomes, obsessive. Like, an extreme would be like people have the survival instinct, but then they get really worried about everything that happens. Every little noise, every little creak, and they get paranoid. And then there is the ignorance. The main point of the Buddhist practice is to understand clearly the way things really are. There's a whole purpose, wisdom, in the formal way of presenting it, wisdom, to really realize the truth of the way that things really are. So as we begin to investigate, just for the developing meditation practice, with mindfulness, awareness, is bringing attention to the body and the feelings and the states of mind, we begin to see them more clearly as they are, rather than how we expect them to be or how we interpret them to be. And of course, if we really begin to observe them very carefully, we begin to see how changeable they really are. Just like being more attentive to the way the body is. We have this concept of body, which for most people is generally pretty consistent. Huh? And then when something is, different in the body, then you think, oh, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? Yeah. But if we begin to observe it more carefully, we begin to recognize, hey, that it's actually consistent is abnormal. That it continues. Every day. Every day the body keeps ticking over. Not everybody's body, but or if you look more carefully, probably there's some aspect of your body that doesn't tick over the same as the day before. You got a little ache here and a pain there, and just like now today probably lots of activity. You had to do some work cleaning up and things, and tomorrow morning just observe your body. Ooh, a little ache here and an ache there. Because the body's always changing. It's a dynamic process. It's a physical process. It's not a thing. Even though we look at something like this floor, it's been here for, I guess it was, as part of, I think I remember, since 1988, they built the sala. 1988, you see. Tomorrow was the 40th anniversary also, so celebration. So, but this floor has been changing too. It just changes slowly. That's all. And the Buddha gave these themes to contemplate. The body, the feeling tones, the states of mind. Not only because they're in this what we take to be ourself, but because you can see the change very quickly. Just observing the nature of the breath, the body. You can see the change happening if you observe it more clearly. But if you sat here and contemplated this floor changing, could be here for 40 years and didn't change that much. 30 years. Didn't change that much. There was a few little dents in it here. I don't think those were there when they first put it in, but But you'd probably fade away before you had a deep insight into impermanence, probably. If you're looking at this floor all the time. But if you're observing your breath, you're observing the sensations in the body, it's cool, it's warm, you're tired and you got energy, and you can observe them really reasonably quickly. And just observing the breath, for example. How many breaths do you take? Inhalation, exhalation, every minute. So you can see impermanence, how it changes. The air going in, the air going out. And the more that we contemplate those realities of the body and mind, the more that wisdom becomes clear of impermanence, change, and becomes more dynamic. You can see causality there. Not only is there changes, but there's a causal effect. There's causes and effects there. The body is cold because of the temperature, and you put a blanket on and it warms up, and you drink some hot water and you get warm again, and cause and effect processes there. But especially when it comes to states of mind, and maybe we can observe how these particular thoughts or moods arise in the mind. That's what the Buddha was pointing at. These qualities, these particular factors of ignorance and craving, for example. They manifest in the body, but they are states of mind, you can say. We see the ignorance in the mind, we see the craving in the mind. But if you're able to observe the mind carefully enough, with enough calmness of mind, you'll be able to observe these processes there. And what the cause and effect processes involved in it is too. When there is craving, you can notice the restlessness of the body, and the craving has ceased, peacefulness. But it's a matter of, first of all, knowing something about, what the direction of the Buddha's teaching is, what to contemplate, for example, and then actually to apply it. To try to, develop the qualities. The word we call meditation actually in Pali is bhavana, literally is development. It's a matter of developing these practices. And partly it has to do with just putting more energy into it, more attention into it. And the other part is we need to be quite reflective too. Like the development of calm meditation is very, very simple in a way. Probably I would say it's the simplest exercise, though it may be one of the hardest things to do in practice. Just make your mind one, one-pointed. Very absolutely simple, but try and do it. But be able to do that, to make the mind, one with the object, one has to step away from all the interpretations and the thinking about it, the conceptualizing. And then one begins to get a different understanding of reality then. Not relying upon conceptualizing or interpreting all the time, but seeing directly from a calm, clear mind. And that's what Buddha's pointing at as wisdom, really. Seeing things as they really are. Not seeing things as we interpret them to be. We would like them to be, we want them to be, we think they should be, but how they really are. Yeah. It sounds so simple, and yet it could be a lifetime of practice there. Trying to see things clearly as they really are. But in the process, you can say it gets clearer and clearer. We begin to see, first of all, how we make all these abstractions, how we make all of these conceptualizations. And this is how we probably we've actually lived our life or developed our life initially, just through concepts. And you try and just watch a process like breathing, and then you notice, I'm thinking about the breathing, or conceptualizing about it. But just to realizing that, we can learn to let it go, to put it down. We have the wisdom to know that's ignorance, that's not the way things really are, that's just the interpretation of the experience. So by developing this exercise, we begin to understand, the whole principle, the basic principles of causality. First of all, observing, the Buddha just says, observe what it is, how it arises, how it passes away. And when we begin to understand that, we get some deeper insight into not only the impermanent and transient nature of reality, but we begin to understand the processes involved in it too. What's the cause and the effect processes? And begin to recognize the positive ones, the negative ones. And then we can begin to recognize just, you can say the profound insight the Buddha had. Seeing through all of our concepts, seeing through all of the stories, the interpretations we make. Hard to be able to, observe without giving things a label, for example. And just labeling things, in one sense it does give us a certain point of reference, but we have to recognize it's only the label. It's only a perception. It's not the way things really are. It's just a label about it, definition of it. And many times those definitions say, not only are they not, or that they're not sufficient, they don't really encompass it. Just like I tried to mention about the Buddha's awakening. Say, awakening, enlightenment, light goes on and a little light bulb goes on in your head, right? Like in the cartoons, That's what I used to think it was. A little light bulb goes on. Or some people, they maybe they imagine it, like the celestial chorus starts up, Or the little voice says, "You are now enlightened." Or it's like, or the Mandarava flowers are falling down from heaven or something. No, it's just knowing what's going on in your mind and body right now, you see. So fortunately, the Buddha, not only did he have this awakening experience, and as I mentioned, they do say in the scriptures that for every Buddha there's 500. It means quite a few silent Buddhas, people who have had a similar awakening, but they aren't able to explain it. Just like, I lived with Ajahn Chah for some years, and it was quite, I realized how really valuable that was to have somebody who I can say he's in a way he's awakened in some way, but be able to talk about it too, be able to explain it, be able to present it, and not only. He was somebody very special because he could explain it to Westerners. Without speaking English. Maybe that was better, actually. He could more like just be the living example without saying a lot of words, Maybe the more words complicated or get in the way of it. But some other teachers, they were maybe just in a similar way awakened, but they weren't able to explain it very, very clearly. They weren't able to present it. So the Buddha the Gautama Buddha was very fortunate, and can say it's in our not in our lifetime, but it's in our historical era anyway. The Buddha's. They say that even the Buddha's teaching is impermanent, you see. That it'll finally pass away as well, the Buddha's teaching. But we're at this stage, halfway. Depends on what kind of interpretation one makes of the commentaries and things, but still the Buddha's teaching is available to us. I recognize now, like one of the book I'm working on right now is, I have to go back to the Pali Canon, and I recognize, just how hard it is for us these days to understand some of these concepts the Buddha had to work with. There were some of the teachings that probably were very common in his time, particular themes he used, like I mentioned last week, the 5 groups of grasping, the 5 khandhas. In the Buddha's time it was very well known. But these days you talk about the 5 khandhas, the 5 groups of grasping, and people are body, feelings, perception, mental processes, consciousness, and people are, maybe the most we can do is body and mind. And even something like consciousness, I was trying to find ways to explain it, and even consciousness, there's no kind of agreed translation, especially in using English language. There's all these associations with consciousness. When I was in Thailand a couple of years ago, I was working on this theme about consciousness, vijnana, and how to explain it properly. And then I happened to notice there was a book in the library called Consciousness Explained. Aha! I found it, Great big thick book, unfortunately. So I picked this book up and I was reading through it, and the guy he was a really good writer. He was really interesting things he was talking about and discussing, a very brilliant mind. And at the end of it, I closed the book and said, "What's consciousness?" And then I happened to come across a review later on, and this reviewer said, this book should have been called Consciousness Explained Away. So it wasn't my fault. But the trouble was, like many of these, philosophers or even some scientists, neuroscientists, they have their own definition of consciousness which doesn't fit in with the Buddha's definition of consciousness. Yeah. So we have to go back to the original scriptures, the Pali Canon, for example, and then try to tease out the meaning the Buddha had and keep it in our mind all the time. This is what he means by consciousness. And it even gets to the point where, like in Thailand, that the Thai language is based upon the Pali language, and so they've adopted some Pali words into the Thai language, and some of them very, very successfully. Like the word for impermanence, anicca. I prefer how the Thais relate to it, rather than just saying things are impermanent. They say "mai uncertain. Things are uncertain. That's how you live. That's how we human beings live with impermanence. It's uncertain, unreliable, undependable. But when you say impermanence, anyway, to my mind anyway, it's permanent, and then you remove it. So the basis is back to permanence, it's permanent, and then you take it away, okay, right, now I remember, yeah. But uncertain stops you in your tracks. But then some words were adopted in Thai language, and then they got quite distorted. So like the word for consciousness in Thai, vinyan, now means ghost. Better not talk too much about it late at night, huh? But being able to understand something about what the Buddha is talking about, some of his particular themes, and then be able to contemplate them, you see. So I mean, the Buddha's awakening experience came out of his meditation practice. He wasn't reading a book. He didn't just think about it, but he was contemplating. What's the cause of suffering? Probably if you take that theme yourself, what's the cause? What's behind my suffering? Why is there suffering there? And just look at whatever kind of suffering you experience, physically, mentally, emotionally, and if you can really open your mind to it, inquire, what's behind it? What's behind it? From not adding more interpretations and more stories about it, but just trying to observe what's going on there. Why is there suffering? And maybe you can begin to get some sense for it. Restlessness. Why is there restlessness? Where are you going anyway? We're just going into the grave, right? And you can do that anywhere. You don't need to go anywhere. That's all the Buddha, you can say that's what the Buddha's theme was. He just took up this theme, what is the cause of suffering? And what's behind it? What's setting it off? And he did have a very good background of concentration meditation first, which he learned from the Hindu tradition. But from a calm contemplation, a contemplation of a calm mind, he was able to see more clearly what's really behind it, without filling his mind up with could be this and it could be that and it might be this and might be that, and what's really going on there. So this is the why we can, something like on a Vesak celebration, you can contemplate, you can reflect upon the Buddha himself, his story, that he was born and he died and he was enlightened, and what's his teaching. And be able to reflect upon that maybe gives us some, there is a human being, to me anyway, there's a human being, even though sometimes he gets, put in a kind of a very glorified state of humanity, but a human being who, through his own aspirations, could realize the cessation of suffering. So there's our homework. Huh? If he can do it, well, it's a possibility for us anyway. So on the day of Vesak, maybe you can look at it in different ways, but ideally we use it as a time, especially not tomorrow, but on the real Vesak day, the real full moon day. There's a time when you'll be here to meditate all night. Lead the all-night meditation.
It's not too cold. Hopefully it's not too cold.
Not too cold, yeah. Might have to do it down near the kitchen where the hot drinks are. But to be able to contemplate, you use that occasion with the full moon of May to contemplate what's the cause of suffering. And not too abstractly, just look at your own experience. What is the suffering, first of all? That's the first. And then what's the cause of it? Where did it come from? What's nourishing it? And then what leads to the cessation of suffering? And so we can contemplate the Buddha's life and his teachings. And that's what the real purpose, I would say, of Vesak celebration is. So I leave it for your contemplation.
Sadhu, 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 anamodami. Down to 12. Down to 12.
12, yes, yeah, I saw that. So maybe you can just play that tomorrow, can I?
Yeah.
It's a bit long for the...
That's right, the celebration.
Celebration. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi
Supatipanno
Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami